Hello guys and welcome to every episode of Family Guy Season 10 Reviewed. This one is slightly longer than the ones we've been used to lately, coming in at 23 episodes. Over such a long format, I really hope this doesn't dip too much from the actually decent Season 9, but I'm not holding out too much hope, as this does seem to be a rather infamous era of the show, and from all the sources I could find, this is also apparently around the time when Seth MacFarlane started to take a back seat from the show a little bit, only doing the voices. But hey, as long as the episodes stay original, and there are a few great ones here and there, I can deal with it. You guys know me by now, I have quite a high tolerance for mediocre or bad programming. I don't like it, but I can usually put up with it. But maybe all this talk is in vain, because maybe this will be a good season, I have faith. In fact, let's start off the goodness right now with Season 10, Episode 1, Lottery Fever. When the Powerball lottery gets to $150 million, Peter gets a second mortgage on the house to buy 200,000 lottery tickets. Liz ends up winning the Griffins the lottery. My best cutaway here was Peter diving into a pile of gold coins, like Scrooge McDuck. My best moment overall was Peter's fake lottery tickets. The season opener gets a 3 out of 5. The story here of our main characters winning the lottery is very cliché and unoriginal, and what they do with it is hardly better. Peter becomes even more of a jerk than normal, ordering Joe and Quagmire around, and at one point he literally shoots them for his own amusement. The ending is also very predictable. The family end up blowing the money as Carter predicted, so they have to rely on Quagmire's generosity to get the house back. As you might have realised by now, the jokes are the only reason this episode is still decent. I thought they were a good collection. Peter having thousands of fake lottery tickets printed up is so like him. I also like how Brian figured out the second batch of tickets were also a test right away. Speaking of Peter acting like Peter, him trying to dive into the coins Scrooge McDuck style also falls into that category. I always enjoy his overly detailed explanations when he's in pain like that. Him yelling at sushi restaurant customers, I also found funny. You also have Stewie put a giant mobile in the sky, and many more little jokes. If only they handled the lottery premise better. Season 10, Episode 2, Seashell Party. With the Griffins left housebound during a hurricane, Brian decides to take psychedelic mushrooms. Meanwhile, the rest of the family get bored and insult Meg, only this time she stands up for herself. As far as any best moments go, the only decent moment in the episode has to be the best cutaway and moment, and it's the Italian man versus the black woman. It may have been nothing but stereotypes, but I still found it quite funny, especially the flock of Jews flying away. This episode gets a 1 out of 5. This is an infamous episode of the show, in my opinion for good reason. Before I even go into the horrible moral or lesson at the end, the majority of the episode is just filler. Minutes are spent on about a dozen front-facing shots of the house in the storm. Either that or Peter making random grunts and humming noises. It's such a bore. The bits in between of Meg giving her family some home truths are fine. She is 100% right after all. But it's so deflating to see her make excuses for her abuse in the end, and go right back to normal. It's Stockholm Syndrome on steroids. A bit of serious advice from me. If you ever find yourself in some kind of situation like that in real life, for God's sake don't care about the feelings of your abusers. That's the last mindset you need to be in. If possible, try and get out of that situation in any way you can find. Even the subplot here was bad, relying almost solely on gross out humour, like Brian cutting off his own ear. That's just uncomfortable. The only reason I never gave this episode a 0 is that there were a few okay things. Brian's trip did have some nice animation in fairness, even if it was overly gross. You also have the black woman Italian guy confrontation I liked, and to be fair, seeing Stewie take care of Brian in his time of need was kind of nice to see. Season 10, Episode 3, Screams of Silence, the story of Brenda Q. Quagmire's sister Brenda and her abusive boyfriend Jeff come to visit him. Quagmire and his friends are appalled at the abuse and try to find a way to stop their relationship. Once again we have a cutaway doubling up as the best moment of the episode, and that's of course Peter singing Iraq Lobster. After quite a lot of deliberation, I gave this episode a 2 out of 5. I'm sure some of you are shocked at that right away, expecting this to be maybe a 1 or worse. And looking at my notes here, I'm gonna have plenty of time to explain myself because this is probably gonna be the longest review I've ever done. It's just a doozy of an episode to talk about. I think the most important thing to kind of get understood right from the start about this episode is that it's not told from Brenda's perspective. In fact, Brenda is hardly a character. So because of that, it's not going to offer any good advice to people who are stuck in abusive relationships. You can criticise that choice of not making her a fleshed out character if you want. I will myself later on in this review, but it's what we are working with regardless. Rather, I feel this episode is more aimed at the friends and family members of abuse victims, and trying to analyse what they go through and maybe some ways where they can help the situation. Quagmire's speech to Brenda at the intervention is of course a glaring example. A lot of people, probably most people, really criticise Quagmire's speech to Brenda, calling it victim blaming and lacking nuance. And yeah, of course it is lacking nuance to some extent. I think we all understand it's not always easy for a victim of abuse to get out of such a relationship, and the way Quagmire worded some of the speech is absolutely clumsy, no doubt about that. But at the same time, I think it kind of goes to show how hard it is for someone in that situation to know what to say and how to say it. Let's put it this way, I do genuinely believe that Quagmire does love his sister, and I do believe his speech was a genuine attempt to snap Brenda out of her brainwashed, gaslit, abused state. And you know what, I'm not even gonna outright call it wrong because such tough love, if you will, might well help get through to certain people. Of course, other people it's gonna have the complete opposite type of effect. That's where the complexity and nuance of the issue does come in. But again, anyone who goes on a complete rant about Quagmire's speech and tries to claim that there is a one-size-fits-all way which you must go about speaking to someone who is in this situation to try and get the best results, I think they're fooling themselves. I don't think such a thing exists. Again, I'm not even saying Quagmire's speech was good, because there were problems with it, but it's very hard to know what to say. We don't get enough of Brenda's character to know whether this type of approach is likely going to work with her or not. But we can assume it didn't work because she stays with Jeff in the episode. In many ways, Brenda seems to be like a dark, cardboard cutout of what the writers think a stereotypical, realistic victim of abuse would look like. The type of person who has been on the receiving end of such psychological manipulation, as well as the physical abuse, that they will try and explain their situation away as totally normal. And as I discussed earlier, that's a hard situation to be in, to try and get a good outcome from. And what I'm about to say might rub some people up the wrong way, I don't know. But simply, the brutal reality of situations like this is that the victim of the abuse does need to find some inner strength to help themselves. Call it victim blaming if you must, but frankly, it doesn't matter whether it's the victim's fault or not. You still happen to be in this situation and really have to try and find a way out. Otherwise, any chance of living a happy life is kind of gone. Sure, family and friends can help, like Quagmire tries to do in this episode, but if the victim doesn't want to help themselves, then they're always going to remain trapped. Again, doesn't mean they're in the wrong, but that is a big reason why so many abusive relationships go on and on in real life. It's sad but true. In fact, the main problem I have with this episode, and why I consider it bad, is that the ending never stuck the landing at all. Quagmire and his friends plan to take Jeff out in the woods to kill him, which is somewhat realistic. Whether you think it's right or not, no doubt a lot of men in real life, once they hear about abuse like this, they would kind of get together and try to kick the guy's ass. That no doubt goes on, and the showdown between Quagmire and Jeff was quite intense. And him killing Jeff was kind of a satisfying moment, I guess. However, this all goes back to the problem I mentioned at the start of the review. Because the story was not told from Brenda's perspective, she never had a chance to sort things out herself. We don't get to see her work through her own issues, or get help herself. So because of this, she's still a mental wreck at the end. Getting rid of Jeff, although it was like the #1 priority, it doesn't automatically solve all of her issues. The way she is when the episode ends leaves us with the impression that she's likely to just go back to another abusive relationship, like a lot of abuse victims sadly do. So because of this, you can't call this episode as a whole a success, can you? That's what I feel is a real missed opportunity here. And maybe this gives validity to the opinion that Family Guy shouldn't try to tackle these issues in a serious way at all because it very rarely executes it well. In fact, I tried to review this as a standalone episode, but if you take into account last episode, this episode looks even worse by comparison. Because the moral of this episode seems to conflict with the moral of that one. That one seems to say you should stay in a abusive relationship for the abuser's benefit. This one seems to say you should take any means necessary to get out of such a relationship, even if it's not the most practical way of doing it. It's such a bad look to have contradicting morals about such a serious issue in back-to-back episodes. I'm gonna cut the review of the story of this episode here. There's a lot I didn't even discuss, like how the episode portrays the police in these situations, and a lot of other stuff as well. If any of you want to discuss this episode with me or challenge my opinions in the comments, which I'm sure some of you will do, please leave me your thoughts, and I'll happily have a discussion about it. But I will leave saying this: the Iraq Lobster is a classic cutaway. You can disagree with all of my other takes, but surely you agree with me on that. Season 10, Episode 4, Stewie Goes for a Drive. Stewie steals Brian's car for a joyride, but ends up crashing it. Meanwhile, Lois and Peter bump into Ryan Reynolds, and he seems drawn to Peter. My best cutaway here was Stewie watching the Russian cartoon Shoe and Shoelace after being shipped off to Siberia, and my best moment overall was just Stewie's pure excitement at driving Brian's car. This one gets, say, 3 out of 5. There was nothing particularly bad here, but there was nothing for me to get super excited about either. The Peter and Ryan Reynolds plot was kind of weird. The whole thing was all about Ryan seemingly being gay for Peter, and Peter being totally oblivious to it. They seemed to think this was funny by itself, because there was no attempt to dive into this any deeper. The whole thing even ended by Ryan spewing some Hollywood BS on Peter about him not being gay, and this somehow wins Peter over, but Ryan says he's done with Peter, and they go their separate ways. Despite them having a famous guest star on, they never really made the most of it. The Stewie-Brian stuff was a little better. Just seeing Stewie's genuine enthusiasm at being a bit naughty and driving Brian's car was fun to see. Sure, it's not realistic, but who cares? The bit where he runs away and was taken in by Consuela was okay at least, and the ending where Brian takes partial responsibility of his car being destroyed was nice to see. He did leave a baby alone in his car after all, even if it is Stewie. This was about average in the jokes department. Peter snapping his neck instead of attending Lois's book club was a good quick gag, but my favourite of all was a very straight to the point Russian cartoon. I love the proud eyes and the mustache which the character Shoelace has, and of course the Soviet national anthem at the end was the much needed cherry on top. Season 10, Episode 5. Back to the pilot. Stewie and Brian travel back in time to the very first episode of the series, but Brian messes up the timeline by telling his past self about 9/11. My best cutaway was the terrorists' failed follow-up attack to 9/11, and best overall moment was Stewie and Brian being baffled by their old selves just standing still during cutaways. I gave this one a 4 out of 5. I actually had this as one of my top 10 episodes when I did that Family Guy list a few years back, but now, while I still like the episode, I didn't find it quite as good on rewatch. Maybe it's just me having my review hat on and analysing it more closely, because I very much like the premise. Travelling back in time to the first episode was a clever idea. It allowed them to show off the differences in animation between the show now and back then. They even poked some fun at the old animation mistakes. The observation of how they all stood still during cutaways back then, compared to messing around nowadays, I also found funny. Some of the other moments here include Brian and his tennis balls, and the absurdity of the dystopian world, which was created because 9/11 never happened. And I can't lie, Al-Qaeda trying to fly a plane into the St. Louis Arch was a great visual gag. I was even fine with them using 9/11 as a plot point. Sure, them high-fiving over causing the event was a slightly edgy moment, but hey, I'm not one to say that any kind of comedy should be off limits, no matter how recent an event may have been. The reason this never got a 5 is that I do feel the middle section dragged on a bit, without too much actually happening. Too much idle talking, not enough action. And sure, the ending with Stewie yelling at all the clones was okay. I especially liked seeing Peter there, but it was a bit hard to follow what was going on. Still a fun episode overall though. Season 10, Episode 6, Thanksgiving. As the whole gang comes to the Griffins for Thanksgiving, Joe and Barney are depressed, as Thanksgiving marks the anniversary of their son Kevin's death in Iraq. However, they get a shock when Kevin turns up for dinner. And my best cutaway here was a tie. I couldn't choose between Peter faking his own death and the giant crab which guards the house. And my best moment overall was Kevin's reasoning for leaving the war. This one gets a 3 out of 5. So first things first, this episode is held back by the fact that it's mostly just everyone sitting around the dinner table, with not a lot going on between Kevin's flashbacks. Also, the snide comments from everyone during the serious moments makes all the characters look like assholes, instead of it actually being good comedy. In terms of Kevin's story though, it was fine, even if the timeline was a bit sketchy. I personally do have sympathy for him quitting the war, but that's only because I absolutely detest needless wars, and imperialism in general, so naturally anything which goes against that, I will tend to support. Although I will say I found a little swerve funny, when you think it was this Iraqi child Kevin befriended who was killed by the US bombs, and that's what pushed him to leave, when in fact it was just this random guy who neither Kevin or the child really knew. I found that funny in the moment. The jokes were also decent here. My two favourite cutaways were both great. No dentist appointment for this guy, says Peter as he lies in a coffin underground, as well as the giant crab who blocks people from coming in and loves to go, no 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 no. To go with those two cutaways, you also have some good Mayor West lines, and the bit about the cutaway not being ready, so they had to play a non-related one. Season 10, Episode 7, Amish Guy. When Meg falls for a boy named Eli, the Griffins find themselves in a war against the local Amish community. My best cutaway was, no one likes rice cakes, and my best moment was the pie steam molesting Peter and making Quagmire watch. This one gets a 3 out of 5. This was an okay episode, but not enough to get a 4, mainly because most of the bits about the Amish were very obvious jokes and stereotypes about their lack of technology. The only part of that I enjoyed was them rebuilding the barn over and over again after Peter kept destroying it with his weapons. The little love story going on in the background between Meg and Eli, I ended up enjoying. Sure, it was very bland, and was resolved in a very typical way, and there wasn't even much time devoted to it, but frankly it was just good to see Meg in a normal relationship for once. This boy did seem to genuinely care about her, and the final showdown between Peter's friends and the Amish did at least try to add some tempo and liveliness. As far as the jokes I liked, there was Peter looking hilarious on a motor scooter, disqualifying him from going on the ride, the rice cake designed by the evil Asian guy destroying Peter's insides, and my favourite of all, the rather perverted Looney Tunes-esque pie gag. It's one thing for the pie to have its way with Peter, a lot of things have done that on the show, and to be honest you kind of expect it from a pie baked by Quagmire. But Quagmire's line, "Peter, it's making me watch," as the steam held his eyes open was too much. I love that line. Season 10, Episode 8, Cool Hand Peter. Peter, Cleveland, Joe and Quagmire go on a road trip to New Orleans, but they end up getting framed for drug possession by a cop and are forced to work. Soon, the gang devise a plan to escape. My best cutaway here was the impossible tasks Bonnie gives Joe. My best moment was Peter tricking the sheriff into thinking he was his wife, even though he never even had a wife. I gave this one a 4 out of 5. This one is fairly solid, like the last episode, but unlike that one, this one does just about manage to get a 4. In terms of what goes on, the gang are feeling a bit fed up with what they consider to be their mundane life, so they decide to go on a road trip together. Unfortunately for them, a crooked cop gets them doing prison work. Soon enough, Joe, acting like a pathetic cripple, manages to buy them enough time to make a run for it, and they end up as fugitives. Their time on the run was pretty engaging, or I found it to be at least, whether it be Quagmire complaining about restaurants not being able to use their real brand names on the train, or just the general banter between the guys. But the bit where they're trapped in the sheriff's house, and Peter is talking to him as his wife, and the sheriff goes, "Wait a minute, I don't have a wife?" That cracked me up. It's just a level of dumb gag, which works perfectly for this show. Joe also proves he's not a worthless cripple after all, by organising his police buddies back in Quahog to save the day. The speech he gives to the cops may be very on the nose, but at the end of the day, it's exactly the message which needs to be heard. Some of the other moments which helped get this to a 4 was Stewie saying, "I guess this is the night bitches die," after seeing the girls plan to do to him what they did to Brian, as well as another rendition of the always funny would you rather between the guys. This time the choice was between Hitler or a hobo with a 5% chance of getting inherited by a rich guy. I agree with Joe on this. I don't know why Quagmire keeps trying to make Hitler work. If you're ever in that situation, I think you have to take your chances as the hobo. Season 10, Episode 9, Grumpy Old Man. After Carter falls asleep while driving, Lois tries to convince him to retire to Florida. My best cutaway here was how a pizza place ruins a salad, and my best moment was Death getting reincarnated as a Chinese baby girl. I gave this one a 2 out of 5. This wasn't horrible, there just wasn't enough meat on the bones, so to speak, especially with the Carter stuff. I do totally buy that Carter is a type of guy who could decline if he retires. Some people really do go downhill after they retire. It seems like they lose all their purpose in their life. But then again, he did fall asleep at the wheel and cause a massive pile-up, so he probably isn't all there at this point anyway. Outside of a few moments of Carter being Carter, the main plot isn't at all engaging or entertaining. There were a few decent cutaways like Bruce Wayne not wanting to reveal himself to his superhero buddies because he didn't want to open his wallet, the drill sergeant with Alzheimer's, and the fairly accurate depiction of how a pizza place handles a salad. The darkest joke here also happened to be my favourite though. Getting reincarnated as a Chinese girl, only to appear right back, is about as brutal as it gets. Season 10, Episode 10, Quagmire and Meg. On Meg's 18th birthday, Quagmire makes a move on her. Peter tries to stop the relationship. My best cutaway was the Jewish fight club at Mort's, and my best moment was the family at the Teen Choice Awards. This one gets a 2 out of 5. Despite the fact that Meg is technically an adult once she's 18, and this is the type of thing Family Guy does go for, I still found Quagmire making it his mission to have sex with Meg rather uncomfortable. If it was made into one massive farce, I could have maybe just about dealt with it, but they add in scenes which almost seem designed just to be creepy. Whether you find Quagmire's antics creepy or not, I have a hard time to believe anyone would find them particularly funny. Then you have Lois not caring about the situation at all, then suddenly changing her tune, and apparently starts caring so much about Meg for the ending. Basically none of it is believable. I don't buy Peter and Lois caring this much about Meg. And frankly, I'm not even sure I buy Quagmire being attracted to her in the first place, given how he's acted towards her in the past. So the story was a miss for me, and the jokes were average at best. None were real standouts, but the poxy Jewish fight club, where they stop as soon as someone gets touched basically, was okay. As was the reason for the traffic jam being that the animators hadn't drawn the road yet. And yes, the parody of the Teen Choice Awards was good. They managed to capture the douchey vibe of a lot of the presenters and how the audience goes wild for the obvious cheesiness of it all. Still, the main story was too off-putting for me to like the episode. Season 10, Episode 11, The Blind Side. Brian gets a new girlfriend who is blind. He soon finds out that she hates dogs, so he has to keep his identity hidden. Meanwhile, Lois gets new stairs, and Peter keeps falling down them. My best cutaway was Peter listening to Lois complain about female co-workers. And the best thing here was Peter repeatedly falling down the stairs. This one gets a 3 out of 5. As you might be able to tell by the 16 cutaways, this was definitely held up more by the jokes than whatever story was going on. It was the typical Brian stuff of him getting a girlfriend and then finding some kind of issues connecting with them. This time it was because the girl hated dogs. Doesn't seem like there's an easy solution to that, does there? And it turned out there wasn't, because Brian had to lie and mislead her the entire time they were together. This not only made him look bad, it also made her look stupid. I mean, she's just blind, not dumb. There is a difference, as Woozy from GTA San Andreas would tell us. Hopefully you got that reference. Back to the matter at hand. I mean, how on earth did she think that a little escalator was the Eiffel Tower? That's just so dumb. The conclusion to it all, as Stewie being a fake nurse, wrapping Brian up in bandages and cutting his tail off, was just as bad as it sounds. Yeah, let's just move on from that and discuss the funny moments, shall we? Peter falling down the stairs despite all of his best efforts, like sanding his shoes, covering himself with pillows, etc., was a classic Family Guy moment. Whether it be the censored or uncensored version, it's funny either way. Also, given just how many there were bound to be a few cutaways which hit the mark. I like the stupidity of the easily startled wallpaper, as well as Stewie's choreography for Showgirls. Peter half listening and agreeing with everything Lois said while she was trashing her co-workers was absolutely the way to go. Seems like you're doing everything and they're doing nothing. I'm sure that's exactly how it was in reality. Season 10, Episode 12, Living on a Prayer. Stewie makes a new friend, Scotty Jennings, but when he collapses, they rush him to the hospital and discover that he has cancer. This causes Lois to clash with his family, who rely on divine healing. My best cutaway for this one was Peter pushing Thelma and Louise over the cliff. Goodbye, terrible women. And my best moment was Peter at the various checkpoints before kidnapping Scotty. I gave this one a 2 out of 5. For something which seems serious on the face of it, this episode didn't really do a good job exploring the topic very well. I mean, I am probably in the vast majority who think that super religious people who refuse to get their kid treatment for a life-threatening disease are in the wrong, but that is like the most extreme example possible of this dynamic. In general, I would actually err on the side of the parents getting to choose what's best for their kid over the state. But whatever side of the argument you fall on, this episode never offered much insight either way, because as I said, the situation was so over the top. In the end, Lois and Peter do get the child treated after convincing Scotty's parents that the treatment itself is actually their prayers being answered, which is an argument which makes some degree of sense, I guess. But it still feels very convenient that it won them over that quickly, almost like it's an argument that's meant to trick them into ignoring their beliefs. I also didn't find this episode that funny overall. The cutaways were a bit lackluster, although I would say the scene of Peter acting out all these ridiculous situations, getting ready for the kidnapping, contained some funny stuff. I especially liked the one of him not answering because something went terribly wrong. Season 10, Episode 13. Tom Tucker, the Man and His Dream. When Peter discovers that Tom Tucker played the role of Michael Myers in Halloween 4, he finds out about his failed Hollywood career. Peter offers to be his agent and take him to Hollywood to rekindle his acting career. My best cutaway for this one was the squirrel in the garden taunting Brian. And let's be real, Tom Tucker's performance as Michael Myers was the best bit. I gave this one a 3 out of 5. They were onto a winner with the basic premise here. That being Tom Tucker as an actor, it's hilarious how he delivers every line, no matter the context, in such a matter-of-fact, news-reading way. Doesn't matter the character he's playing. This is shown best by his appearance as Michael Myers. I'm Michael Myers. I have enormous psychological problems and I'm gonna take them out on you. Just brilliant. If the episode stuck with more of this, and actually had Pete and Tom work together to try and make it big in Hollywood, this episode could have been great, I think. I did like Peter being the agent, the way he leaves dinner in such a pompous way after realising he can't pay, and the way he throws his business cards from the Hollywood sign. Sadly though, the episode deviated from that, and had Peter leave Tom in a conflict which had no juice. Peter soon gets stumped himself by a returning James Woods, who got revived in the creepiest way possible, and the thing ends with them going back to Quahog with their tail between their legs. This could have been so much better. The subplot of Chris dating a Lois lookalike wasn't great either. I don't even have anything to say about it. The cutaways were average, given that there were like 10 of them. Chris's reaction to bad news was so bizarre that it kind of worked. As did the squirrel coming by to taunt Brian. The way he strolls past, giving the middle finger. It's exactly the kind of arrogant insult a pretentious guy like Brian deserves. Season 10, Episode 14. Be careful what you wish for. Peter befriends a dolphin who comes to stay at the house. Meanwhile, Brian discovers that Stewie's daycare classroom is being neglected by Miss Emily. My best cutaway here was Peter making the audience read the cutaway. And my best moment was Joe as King Neptune sinking to the bottom of the sea. I gave this one a 1 out of 5. So I guess the big gimmick of this episode was Ricky Gervais playing the dolphin, and it was exactly the type of performance you would expect from him. Very sarcastic, filled with dry humour, but I didn't think it was anything special, to be honest. If anything, I preferred his guest appearance on The Simpsons, even though that was far from perfect. He was still given more to work with there. The dolphin character he plays is rather uninteresting, and him staying at the Griffin's house didn't add anything we hadn't seen before from previous house guests. The ending with the tacked on dolphin marriage crisis was just that, tacked on. At least I found the gag of Joe slowly sinking in the background quite funny, before he was eventually found later on by Seamus. The cutaways in general here weren't good, but the one of Peter making us read the cutaway was something different at least. So the main plot was just mediocre. The Brian stuff is what makes this episode really bad. Brian is apparently quite happy to let kids and babies, including Stewie, who he is supposed to care about, get seriously hurt, maybe even killed, if it allows him to get with a hot girl. And it's not even like he's protecting her because he really cares about her, which would still be bad enough. He's literally covering up for her neglect, just because he wants to have sex with her. It's just embarrassing for Brian to sink to this level, and it makes for rather uncomfortable viewing. The ending is also a total slap in the face. Brian finally does call the cops on her because he found out she already had a boyfriend, and they treat this like a happy ending. Stewie even thanks Brian. Stewie shouldn't be thanking him. Brian should be apologising for being an absolute asshole, and even that wouldn't have been enough. But they didn't even think that was necessary. So the only point to this story which I could tell was to make absolutely sure we know that Brian is a total dickhead. So thanks for that episode, you made your point. Season 10, Episode 15, Burning Down the Bayet. Peter, Quagmire and Mort decide to burn Goldman's pharmacy down to collect insurance money However, Joe is suspicious and is determined to find out what really happened. My best cutaway was Joe going to see the handicapped Cher impersonator, and best moment was Peter and Quagmire trying to pack pills on the pharmacy conveyor belt. I gave this one a 2 out of 5. There is not much depth to the story here, it's just Peter and Quagmire deciding to help Mort out, who is struggling financially, so they burn down a pharmacy to collect on the insurance, in a scheme which actually ends up working. The problem for them is that Joe won't let the case go. A lot of the time in the episode is devoted to basically Peter trying to distract Joe from doing his investigation. It's all revealed to be a bit of a farce in the end though, because Joe recovers a phone message from Peter, openly admitting to doing the crime. It all comes across as a bit underwhelming, especially as Joe lets them go in the end anyway, because he also hates insurance companies. The morality here is a bit hard to pin down. I do agree with the episode that insurance companies do tend to be corrupt and are often hard to deal with, but I'm not sure burning down your own business is the way to deal with them. And to be honest, I don't really know what the episode's position is. The guys are portrayed as both in the right and in the wrong at various points. So as you can hopefully tell by my explanation, this was all a bit of a mess. It also wasn't the funniest in terms of jokes, but Joe and the other handicapped people loving the handicapped Cher impersonator singing If I Could Turn Back Time was very good. Gotta love that sitting ovation. I also appreciated the I Love Lucy parody of the conveyor belt. I remember an episode of Drake and Josh also doing a parody of that scene. Season 10, episode 16, Killer Queen. After Chris wins a hot dog eating contest, a concerned Lois signs him up for fat camp, but the campers start getting murdered. Meanwhile, Brian scares Stewie with Queen's News of the World album. My best cutaway for this one was Peter claiming that he carried the production of Pirates of Penzance, and my best moment was the reveal of who the murderer was. I gave this one a 3 out of 5. The first half of this was so flat. It consisted of nothing but Chris in a drawn out hot dog eating contest, and of course Brian scaring Stewie with the Queen album over and over again. They never actually got into the main bit of the story until halfway through, and honestly I'm baffled as to why, because it was actually quite good. I enjoyed seeing Patrick Pudishment again, since I enjoyed his first appearance on the show, and they linked him in quite well with the mystery of the murders at the camp. That was all intriguing stuff, and the revelation that the murderer was the guy Chris beat in the hot dog eating contest back at the start of the episode was a great callback. If only this episode committed to that plotline almost entirely, it could have been a real success, but instead it was weighed down with some boring stuff early doors. The cutaways here were solid at least. You have Peter teabagging the Riddler, the anal retentive bandits, as well as the land-spotting prankster. I found all of those funny, but Peter's masterful performance of Major General's song takes the cake, or should I say the eggs on top. Season 10, episode 17, Forget Me Not. After a car accident, Peter, Joe, Brian and Quagmire awake to find Quahog deserted, and their memories gone. The best cutaway here for me was Who Else But Shirt Pants, and my best moment was Brian being Quagmire's dog. I gave this one a 4 out of 5. This was a very solid episode. Just the concept of the gang being left alone in the world was interesting, but we also got a bit of a look at Peter and Brian's relationship, which we rarely get to see. Them all thinking Peter killed everyone because of the silly paper he got from the laser tag place was a nice callback to the start of the episode, and definitely added some much needed conflict for the ending. Brian saving Peter after bonding with him over the simple stuff was surprisingly natural and believable. The revelation that it was all some elaborate simulation set up by Stewie was fine, I guess. It was kind of to be expected, to be a dream of some sort, given that it's kind of hard to make this canon, isn't it? but it didn't really take away from the story for me. As I said, what really made the episode enjoyable were just the moments of the guys exploring the abandoned world, Quagmire calling himself Shirt Pants, and having a full Who Else song to go with it was great, as was the awkward moments of him trying to be Brian's owner. Even more nice moments include the bird is a word reference, and the funny cutaway of Peter using Brian as a fender guard. There's no way he didn't hear Brian there, by the way. Season 10, Episode 18. You can't do that on television, Peter. Peter creates and stars in a children's TV show, which he uses to bash Lois. Meanwhile, Meg gets an internship with Dr. Hartman at the hospital. My best cutaway was an Italian mom without bad kids, and my best moment was Dr. Hartman's cheat sheet on the human body. This one gets a 3 out of 5. I don't have a lot to say about this, other than it was okay with a few standout moments. Peter and Lois's marriage issues were far too stale for me to care about really, but Peter getting into children's TV shows worked for me. It was nice to see him watch Jolly Farm with Stewie. I love how Stewie was able to make a better duck than Peter could. There were a few good gags once Peter gets his own TV show, like the Kentucky's Estate jingle. And in fairness to Peter, the saggy naggy character he based off Lois was quite amusing. Not so amusing for Lois though, because the kids beat the crap out of her. There was a subplot going on throughout which I kind of liked. It was Meg trying to learn the doctor's craft from Dr. Hartman, which is just as silly as it sounds. I love the bits of Dr. Hartman having to consult his book to explain obvious parts of the human body, like the head and shoulders, and the fact that he refers to it as a cheat sheet is kind of funny by itself. Meg's new knowledge of being a doctor comes up again at the end, when she saves Peter's life after he was attacked by a cougar, which was a result of Peter's terrible idea for the show. Nobody thanked her for it though, which was kind of a slap in the face. Still a decent episode. Season 10, Episode 19. Mr. and Mrs. Stewie. Stewie meets a evil genius girl who's his match in weaponry. They get along great, but problems arise when she commands him to kill Brian. My best cutaway was Peter's plume pen, keeping Lois up at night. And my best moment was the fight between Stewie and Penelope. After much consideration, I gave this a 3 out of 5. Yes, it was close to a 4, but ultimately, I didn't think it was quite funny enough. Stewie meeting a girl who's a genius, and has all kind of weapons like him, was interesting, even if everything revolved around violence for the sake of violence. I still think him and Penelope had some chemistry together, at least enough to carry most of the episode until the final showdown, which was a fitting way to end. I'm always a sucker for a big dramatic fight scene. The little extra plot of Peter crushing Lois in bed, so he turns to sleeping with Quagmire instead, was just as weird as it sounds. They did manage to get a few okay moments out of it, with just how awkward the arrangement was, but there wasn't much story to it really. The only joke I really laughed at in the whole episode was Peter writing with the plume pen. It's the way he speaks in this sophisticated, old-timey way, as well as the dip 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 after every pause. The line, marital concerns continue to bedevil me, was the perfect way to end that cutaway. They sure do, Peter. They sure do. Season 10, Episode 20. Lego My Mego. While in Paris, for a school semester, Meg and her friend Ruth get kidnapped. Stewie and Brian take it upon themselves to track her down and rescue her. My best cutaway for this one was Peter's part-time job as a violin player at a restaurant, and my best moment overall was the French guy using a Jacques hammer. I gave this one a 3 out of 5. There were parts of this I enjoyed, mainly involving how the episode took the mick out of the action movie cliches every step of the way during Stewie and Brian's quest to find Meg. You had the cliche fight scenes with the inept bad guys, and Stewie and Brian somehow keeping up with them in the car while they were on foot, just by cutting across one field. At one point, once they got in the car, there was a car chase GPS which spelled out all instructions for them, which included a stuntman in the car. All this was enjoyable and kept the action flowing. Some of the other bits I liked were Stewie's overly enthusiastic dance at the slave auction, and the announcer calling Brian someone who doesn't understand auctions. Despite all this though, the ending seemed rather abrupt. There is this prince who is presented in a nice way, and Meg actually willfully agrees to marry him, only for Stewie to shoot him right away. There is no follow-up to that either. Literally next scene is everyone back at home. In general it felt a bit weird how non-serious this episode was, given that the subject matter was human trafficking, but given how it usually turns out when Family Guy tries to take it serious, I guess I shouldn't complain. In terms of the jokes, the two main ones I liked were Peter going gimme money, gimme money, gimme money at the restaurant, and of course the Jacques hammer. Not only is it a good play on words, the sound the Jacques hammer makes really puts the gag over the top. Season 10, Episode 21, Tea Peter. Peter joins the Tea Party and gets Mayor West to shut down the government. My best cutaway was Peter sitting at the mall watching Japanese girls laugh at normal conversation. And my best moment overall was Peter painting the portrait of the family. This one gets another 3 out of 5. The main story here featured some rather underwhelming satire on government, or more accurately, people on the right who want more government. It's a rather biased take, portraying everyone who wants more government as irresponsible idiots who just want to use there being no rules to do whatever they want. There was no attempt to show their side of the argument. You know, the kind of people who know there needs to be some kind of structure in place, but think the government is wasteful and could be cut quite a bit. That argument was never shown off. There's just no subtlety to anything going on. The town goes to hell instantly after Mayor West disbands the local government. The town is up in flames in no time. In fairness, I do kind of agree with the ending point. Even myself, someone who despises most governments, and a lot of the people that control them, I do agree that there probably does need to be a government of some kind. I'm not an anarchist, because I realise that even if you did get rid of government, I think it's inevitable that something else resembling a government would just rise up to take its place anyway. I think that's just human nature, the need for some kind of organised structure to be in place. It makes people feel secure, even if the system is not as functional as it should be. Overall, a lack of subtlety hurts the story too much for it to be good. Thankfully, there were quite a few moments I found funny to help the episode out. The family asking Peter to draw their portrait, only for him to draw the father and son normal, but the mum and daughter scantily clad kissing, is such a Peter thing to do. Equally good was the observation of how Japanese girls laugh at the simplest things. Calling their people a circus though is probably a bit much. I also enjoyed the slippery floor sign guy, being worried that his wife was crossing the road with another man, and the rather sexist Peter asking if a woman lawyer is in her little courthouse representing Barbie. Season 10, Episode 22, Family Guy Viewer Mail number 2. Stewie and Brian host another collection of Family Guy stories. And there was only one cutaway here, and that was the British cutaway. My best moment was Stewie imagining what the Lois and Peter sex noises were. I gave this one a 2 out of 5. I know I liked the previous Family Guy Viewer Mail episode, loads of seasons back, but this one lost a bit of its luster. The first part was essentially a British version of Family Guy. For the most part, the kind of jokes and stereotypes about British people they did here, we have already seen on the show a few times before, so I struggled to get too into it. Although Peter going, "Ah, bugger, after he hurt his knee made me laugh. If you are British, you will definitely hear the term bugger a lot. And I'm also pretty sure that Peter chasing the Queen's horse into the tunnel making her crash was meant to be a reference to Princess Diana's death. Make of that what you will. The second part I was not a fan of. It was one joke essentially over and over again the whole time, and the joke was simply having all the many versions of Robin Williams characters annoy everyone. It was probably more annoying to me, the viewer, than the characters though. The final part of seeing a day through Stewie's eyes was probably the best of the three. I like his insults to Lois. Some of them are pretty savage, like calling her a white trash hen. Even him going down a slide was made quite enjoyable. The ending bit though was my favourite. How he interprets Peter and Lois having sex as them cutting down trees, and Lois's vibrator as a chainsaw. To be fair to Stewie, he came up with a pretty reasonable interpretation based on the sounds he was hearing. Season 10, Episode 23, Internal Affairs. After getting into a row with Bonnie, Jo cheats on her with a co-worker. Bonnie is furious about this, and the two get a divorce. Peter plans to get them back together by recreating how they first met. My best cutaway was Stewie getting beat up by the gorilla. And best moment overall was the story of how Jo and Bonnie met. So the season finale gets a 3 out of 5. I am so over the Jo and Bonnie stuff at this point. Given how toxic their marriage is on the show, it's hard to really care about their ups and downs. So Jo cheated on her. Who really cares at this point? Bonnie has done that to him as well, even if they tried to sidestep it in this episode. Didn't Bonnie even try to kill Jo at one point too? Maybe that was later on in the show, I can't remember, but either way, it's all just so messed up. And I know for a fact it gets worse in future seasons. So despite this ending being actually decent in fairness, it isn't possible to get invested in it. And for the long-term benefit of the show, I think it might be better to just have them split up. They would probably both be happier, especially Jo, who seemed to find someone who truly loved him despite his handicap. But trying to look past my general bias against the Jo and Bonnie relationship, this episode was fine by itself. There were a few funny moments. Even the giant chicken fight felt quite intense, despite going on for a full 5 minutes. Stewie saying the door should have just been called Gorilla Door instead of Not an Exit, as he was getting beat up by the gorilla, was also good. He kind of had a point. You would not mark something so dangerous with just Not an Exit, would you? That's just asking for some kind of lawsuit. And as a standalone scene, Jo and Bonnie meeting in a strip club, with Africa by Toto playing in the background, was surprisingly atmospheric. Still though, an average at best end to the season. Maybe I was even a little generous giving this a 3, but hey, this season needs all the help it can get. So season 10 is in the books, and here is a season summary. And straight up, the average score here is a 2.7, which is the worst for Family Guy, and does firmly put this season in the bad category. I'll expand on my thoughts after I go through my top and bottom 5 for the season. The bottom 5 episodes were Living on a Prayer at 5, Quagmire and Meg at 4, Screams of Silence, The Story of Brenda Q at 3, Be Careful What You Wish For at 2, and Seashell Party at 1. My top 5 episodes were incredibly disappointing, because as you can see by the chart there were only 3 4 out of 5 episodes, no 5 out of 5s, so essentially I had to fill the list up with 2 of the many 3 out of 5s. So as the imposters on the list, so to speak, we have Arish Guy at 5, Mr. and Mrs Stewie at 4, the 4 out of 5 episodes are Cool Hand Peter at 3, Forget Me Not at 2, and Back to the Pilot as the best of the year. So I guess all of that, along with the pie chart there, gives away that I'm not a big fan of this season, so I guess I should get to explaining why that is. After scanning through the episodes, I noticed that there was a decent selection of storylines. Like there were a few serious stories, a few celebrity guest appearances, a few adventure type stories, and plenty of the normal Family Guy stuff. So I can't really blame a lack of variety for the season's problems. And in general, I don't think there is one broad thing I can point to and say, yes, that is responsible for me not enjoying the season. If anything though, that's even more worrying, because it means that I'm not liking what's actually going on in the episodes. We know Family Guy doesn't have the likeable characters to carry a story the vast majority of the time, There is of course the odd exception, but this season pretty much showed all of the characters at their worst, except maybe Stewie, but even he wasn't amazing, just not as far gone as the rest of them. So when you don't really care about the characters, the only thing the show has to fall back on is the comedy. And while there were some funny moments, which I think you're always going to get from Family Guy, overall, I found this to be one of the least funny seasons so far. The cutaways were slightly lackluster given how many of them there were. For example, an episode might have 10 of them, and I only liked 2. That is not conducive to enjoying an episode overall. There was more filler here than any previous season too, with many gags being drawn out far too long. I can't see this problem getting much better either in upcoming seasons, sadly. It's looking more and more like Season 9 being a bit of a step up was the show's last hurrah. But let me know your guys' takes on this season as a whole, as well as some of the more controversial episodes in the comments. I look forward to talking to you. And while you're at it, please also give the video a like, and the channel a subscribe. As ever, I do appreciate it. For now though, that's me done. Take care everybody.